I'd say my dad had probably the biggest impact on me.
Any of those memories that come to top of mind from when you first met mom, or
Your mom was just, God, she was such a hard worker. She got in her mind that she was going to accomplish something. You couldn't stop her. Watch out, because it was going to happen whether you agreed with it or not. Every time I talk about your mom, I miss her so much.
there's so many good memories that I'm sure you have.
Oh, there are. Well, we were at a party. It was a New Year's Eve party, and two things that I remember most. One, we were there with some friends that I knew from work that she also had met them before, and they were talking about reggae music, and finally the people went away, and she turned to me and she said, "Who's this reggae guy? I never heard of him." And she had been talking about it for 10 or 15 minutes.
Dad, so could you tell me a little bit about your early life? Who were some people who had a significant influence on you, and what was that impact like?
Oh gosh. Uh, I'd say my dad had probably the biggest impact on me. But my grandparents on both sides, both my dad's parents and my mom's parents, were just phenomenal grandparents. I mean, you couldn't want better people. Um, and unfortunately, they died when I was fairly young, except for my grandmother, who, when I went to college, I ended up living with her in her house. And even when I got out of school for a little while, I lived with her, and then later on, she lived with your mom and I, um, and it worked out real well. But then she needed to get with her friends, and so she moved into a, a retired living area for people, where she had a lot of friends, and they did a lot of things. They had potluck, they played bingo. They had people come in and give them different things, talks and stuff. I think you and Joe both went there a number of times to visit her. We would go there, and one of the big things was she would make this peach cobbler, which was fantastic. I mean, it was really good. And your mom, she would always go in there, and then just she was going to take a little bit, and then she took a little bit more, and then a little bit
It was
more.
all gone.
It's unbelievable.
So you mentioned your dad. Like, what would you say are some of the impactful things that he had on you, and some of the things that traits that you learned from him?
Hard work. My gosh. I don't, I mean, my best days, I never worked as hard as my dad ever. He was just unbelievable. And, he worked in construction. He did tile work. He did carpentry work. But he just worked hard. And he wasn't afraid to try stuff. Like, he didn't know how to overhaul an engine, but he would take one apart and start figuring it out. I mean, and I think that's given me a great sense because he had no fear of failure. He figured, hey, what's the worst that can happen? I'll find somebody that'll help me, or I'll find some way to figure this out. And he always did. So my dad only had an eighth grade education. And yet, um, he could speak English, Polish, Croatian, uh, Italian, and a little German, maybe a few other languages. Czech. He could speak a little Czech. He had trouble with the Czech language. Yeah, he always mentioned that. And every time he would be with Czech people and they would start talking, and he'd go, slow down, for some reason. But
And you mentioned Grandma Copsey being a big influence.
oh god,
What were some of the traits that you learned from her?
she was a hard worker too. She could cook and cook and cook, and she had polio as a kid, and it didn't seem to slow her down. Even though I know a lot of times she was in a lot of pain, it ended up affecting her knees quite a bit, and made it difficult for her to be on her feet. But she worked in a chocolate candy factory, dipping chocolates for years. She would have ladies over build. They would sew quilts. She liked to play mahjong, that
Okay.
game with the ladies, which I never really quite ever figured out what they were doing, but she had a great time. She liked to entertain, and then, and then she was both my grandparents, both my grandmothers went to church a lot. She always went to church every Sunday, and my grandmother went every day. And her normal routine was she had a little cart, and she would go to the church, have mass. I don't know if it was 7 or 8 o'clock mass, and then she would go to the grocery store. And at the grocery store, there were a lot of the old ladies that she would, so they would be talk. She'd buy a few things, come home, fix herself a little lunch, have a little dinner. My grandfather, he died. I guess he was 61, and he had come over here right before World War I, around 1914, 1915, somewhere around there. And something happened. I'm not really sure. I wish they were around for me to ask them questions. But all I remember was they lived on a farm, and the Russians, and this is in Poland, kicked them off their family farm. And there was not just him; there was his brothers, sisters, his mom and dad. And I remember him saying to me, and I'll never forget this. He said, "It would have been better if they had shot us, because what they did is they left us to starve." What a terrible thing.
Yeah.
But he had an uncle here, and his uncle sponsored him, and he came over. And his uncle got him a job in the coal mines in Illinois, in Gillespie, Illinois. And he worked there for 30 some odd years, eventually retired from there. Um, was One of the things that was strange to me was when you saw my Polish grandmother and grandfather together, you thought these two people are from the opposite ends of the world, because my grandmother was very fair skinned, short, stocky, dishwater blonde, um, and my grandfather was very thin, jet black hair, black eyes, olive colored skin. And you would think, how does these two people who would look so different
Yeah.
met each other? And I never did know whether there was an arranged marriage or how they. Uh, all I know is that they had 3 kids in Poland, brought them over, and then had 2 more in the U.S. Aunt Barb and my dad.
So you
So,
could say learning from your dad and Grandma Copsy and your grandfather, resilience, hard work, and no fear of failure is kind of,
just jump in there and do it.
yeah, those are some, I think, yeah, very important things that, again, it's hard to learn those things if you're not taught them from a young age. So I think it is one of those essential skills that why it's so important to learn as a child and as you're growing up, because if you don't learn at that age when you're past 18, it's very hard to instill that into somebody. Would you agree with that?
Oh yeah, and that was one of the enduring factors about your mom. Your mom was just, God, she was such a hard worker. And when she got in her mind that she was going to accomplish something, you you couldn't stop her. Watch out, because it was going to happen whether you agreed with it or not. You know, and the other thing I liked about your mom was that she you couldn't you couldn't easily influence her. She had to come to her on her own. She had to decide whether this was a good thing or a bad thing. But boy, once she did, it was hard to change her mind. So, she was at times a little what I would call rigid in perspective.
Oh yeah. No, she was pure persistence and determined,
Right.
and very hardworking. So it's again, I can see why from your family seeing those traits is positive, and then also with mom seeing why that's some attractive traits why you guys were a good fit.
I'll tell you another thing that I think is a trait within my family is loyalty. You know, my brothers were that way. My mom and dad were that way. Uh, my mom and dad fought all the time, and yet they looked out at each other, and nobody better ever say anything,
Yeah.
about my mom or dad. And your mom was the same way. I could count on her 100%.
All right.
Yeah. Every time I talk about your mom, I I miss her so much.
Yeah, it's a tough subject. I can see, but there's so many good memories that I'm sure you have.
Oh, there are so much funny stuff with her.
Yeah. Any of those memories that come to top of mind from when you first met mom or
Well, we were at a party. It was a New Year's Eve party, and two things that I remember most. One, we were there with some friends that I knew from work that she also had met them before, and they were talking about uh, reggae
oh yeah.
reggae music, and finally the people went away, and she turned to me and she said, "Who's this reggae guy? I never heard of." And she had been talking about it for 10 or 15 minutes, and then I had bought with me to the party 2 bottles of Boone's Farm wine and a 6 pack of malt liquor, or maybe it was a 4 pack. I don't remember. But anyway, and those were the small cans. But anyway, I gave her 1 glass of wine, that much, and she got sick. She got bombed and got sick and ended up throwing up. So we ended up leaving before New Year's because she didn't feel good. I thought, what the heck? I go, this is a cheap date, you know.
Half a glass of wine.
Half a glass of wine. Well, the first date we went on, uh, actually was kind of crazy because I had called John, her brother, her older brother, and he and I were friends. And I had never met Fran. And I said, "Are you going to go to this dance at UMSL?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "You want to go together?" He goes, "No, I'm taking Mary," which he ended up later marrying Mary. And I said, "Okay." He called me back a few minutes later. He says, "Would you like to take my sister?" And I said, "Sure, why not?" I didn't know her, I had never met her. So I went, and I had never been to his house. I go over to his house, and I go in, and the first thing that happens is I meet your grandmother. And let me tell you, there is never, I know she's in heaven because she could make anybody feel good about themselves. I mean, she just had an unbelievable ability to make you feel comfortable. I mean, normally when I went on a date with somebody I didn't know and I was meeting the parents, it always felt a little
Yeah.
awkward or I felt uncomfortable. But not at all, not one bit.
She's very endearing and just immediately a loving person, you could tell.
And didn't have a whole lot of money. I paid for my own education. And so I had no money. I thought, how am I going to do this? And I had a little Cardinal plastic piggy bank that I'd been putting pennies in. And I went and cashed them in at the grocery store, which the guy wasn't too happy about getting a bunch of pennies. But for some reason, they went ahead and took them. And I had $2. And it was 50 cents to get into the dance. And I think it was like 25 cents for a soda. So I had 50 cents left, but that wasn't enough to take her anywhere. So we ended up, after the dance, going back to her house and sitting in the driveway on Diamond Drive and talking, you know. And, you know, I left her that night, gave her a good night kiss. And I'm telling you, I'm not exaggerating. I said to myself, I think this is the one. I think this is the gal. Well, then I find out that she had a boyfriend, although they were kind of on and off, Dave. And I had called her up and said, "Do you want to go out on a date again?" She said, "No, she's going out with this guy, Dave." And she didn't think that was a good idea to do that. So I told John, I said, "If she ever breaks up with Dave, you let me know because I'd like to date your brother again." And I, I never went out with anybody after that. I wasn't really, I don't know why. I for somehow thought that I would see her again. And sure enough, I did. And it was near the end of the summer. We started dating, and I was working for Ameren, and we were supposed to go out on her birthday, which was November 21st. And it was a Friday night. I call her up and said, "Hey, I can't go out. The company went on strike, and I can't leave the plant." And she was pissed. She goes, that is the worst excuse I've ever heard. And I said, "What, hon, you know, Fran, listen, it'll be in the newspapers and on the news. Believe me, this is this is not." And we had, you know, dinner reservations. She had bought, you know, some nice clothes. I had actually bought a new pair of pants, you know, for the event because even then I was just starting to get
Yeah.
some money, you know, and so she she ended up believing me, and I was working. God, we were working 12 hours a day, 7 days a week for I think it was 90 days. You know, I got to go home one. I had to go home actually two times. Once was Christmas uh, Eve, and then once was Christmas Day, and spent time with my grandmother and with Fran. You know, so but all four of my grandparents were hard workers. My grandmother uh, on my dad's side, she had a little garden. She was always she loved to uh, pickle pickles, you
Yeah.
know, and we would go over there, and she'd always try to buy like peanut butter and stuff, you know, and it was always strange, and ice cream. And no, no, Grandma, we want those big pickles, you know.
Yeah.
And we'd be running around the yard eating a big pickle, you know. And the other thing she made is she had three plots that were about as big as this desk, maybe a little bigger, of strawberries. And she had chicken wire over them. And she was out there working on those strawberries all the time, picking them and moving them around, doing stuff to them every day. And she would make strawberry preserve. She'd make jelly, and then she'd make these strawberries which you could put on ice cream. So we'd have a little ice cream with strawberries on it. Oh man, it was so
Make
good.
milkshakes.
No, we didn't make. She didn't have a blender.
Yeah.
She had a stove that was cast iron, and one side was gas, and the other side was wood. And then right next to it was a wooden box that ran the length of the window, and that box was half inside, half outside. And in the wintertime, they would put food in there. That's how they kept it cold because they didn't have refrigerators. They had a real ice box that was made out of oak lined with tin, and you put blocks of ice in it. Now, later on, she got a refrigerator. My dad actually got it for her. But my Uncle Joe, or my dad's Uncle Joe, actually built those, actually made those.
And so when you and mom you had your first date to when you had your first date to getting married, what happened in between that?
We played tennis. Uh, we went out with Bob and Betty and John Wigger and his girlfriend at the time.
And so when did you decide? Okay, after your first date, was it 2 years until you decided, or
It
one
was
year?
2 years we got married.
2 years.
72, August 11th, 1972.
And what was
And you know how I know that? It's on my St. Nicholas.
Yeah.
And your mom gave this the day we got married.
And so the proposal, how did that go? I don't know if I've ever heard the story.
Uh, well, the the we were somewhere, and out of the blue, your mom says, are we gonna get married?" I was like, "What?" You know, and I said, "I don't know if I'm ready to get married." You know, I was 23. You know, I mean, and she says, "Well, if you're not interested in getting married, I think we should part ways." I go, "Wait a minute," you know. So I said, "Let me think about it," because I never really thought about it. So within a day or two, I said, "Yeah, let's get married." And I said, "You know, when do you want me to propose to you?" You know, and I said, "You know, Valentine's Day, the 14th is coming up." She goes, "Everybody does the 14th." She goes, "I want you to propose to me on the 15th, payday." This I did. So she somehow was able to get her parents out of the house and the kids, which was there's a gazillion kids still there, and she fixed a steak and lobster dinner. The lobster was pretty good. The steak was pretty bad. It was tough, and she had overcooked it, but I ate it anyway. And I got down on my knee and proposed to her. And we had already picked out a ring, and we picked out the ring on down on Washington Avenue near there, um, at some jewelry store. But she knew what she wanted. We could, the ring wasn't very big. It was only $300. It was, I think, a carrot, maybe. And what was sad was my grandmother tried to give me a ring that was her aunt's, my aunt, her sister. And in hindsight, I wish I had taken that because my brothers ended up pawning it later on. So,
Yeah. And so after getting married, what would you say some of the things, like you guys were married for how many years? Like over
uh,
40,
yeah, let's see, uh, 39.
39. And what would you say are some of the things that you would recommend or traits that you could distill in somebody who wants to have a long-term successful relationship? What can you do?
Well, I think one of the things is I don't care who you are, you're going to have rough patches, and don't let that bother you. You gotta have some sort of steadfastness to it. You know, your mom and I didn't always get along. We had our times when we were at odds with each other, but neither one of us was ever going to give up on our marriage. And it also helps to have a sense of humor and to do little things. The little things mount up. Like if you're getting a drink, say, "Hey, hon, do you want a soda?" If you're uh, going somewhere or doing something, "Hey, is there something I can get while I'm out for you?"
Just showing that you're
Little
thinking
thing,
about them
yeah, little
always.
things,
Yeah.
and it's I mean, that's to me is what love is all about is those little things, you know. So
And do you think now people are just not as resilient, or what do you think the biggest problem is? Why are relationships seeming to get harder, not easier?
I think people get too much into themselves. They become the center of their universe, and I'll be truthful. Your mom and you guys were the center of my universe, and so it was easy for me. It wasn't. I never felt like I was giving up anything or doing without anything. Uh, because we had so much fun, all the time. And I mean, I think that's, if you're miserable, then that's not a good relationship. But if you're doing things, enjoying life, enjoying each other's company, you know, I couldn't wait to get home and talk to your mom about my day, and she would end up talking to me about her day. It was great. And those little things that you're sharing, that's the good part of being married, having a relationship. And the other thing is, it seems like people try to live so much in their phone.
Yeah.
There's times that you got to set that damn thing down and have some one-on-one, talk.
You think that's like for future generations or current generations, is that some advice that you would have, like to be a little bit more present, maybe try to disconnect more? What type of advice do you think is something that would be helpful?
Well, I would say it's called be here now. So if you're with somebody and you're going out to dinner, be with them, be here now with them, listening to what they say
Yeah.
and having them listen to what you say instead of fooling around with your phone and texting everybody and doing a bunch of crap.
Yeah.
Um, uh, as to me, it's just being polite. I, I think we've gotten away, and that's another thing. My parents, even my brother, who's a Marine, and he's one tough sob. He says please. He says thank you. When I take him anywhere, he always thanks me. When Mary does anything, he always thanks her. When she cooks, he always tells her, "Thank you. It was a great meal." And it's always please and thank you. And I think that's another thing that for some reason has gotten lost. Um,
Just being polite and
being polite.
respectful to
You
everyone.
know,
Yeah.
and definitely in the U.S., being polite to elderly. It's just the opposite. It's like you can go ahead and be mean. It's like I showed you that video, that guy walking up and hitting this lady in the back of the head as hard as he could. She's just walking her dog for no reason.
Yeah. Like
I mean, just a random act.
And so you've traveled like a ton over the years. What would you say is like some of the things that you've learned while living and working, overseas? And you've worked in Iraq and Myanmar and other countries.
the thing that you learn is the culture and how society becomes a certain way. Um, if you go to Mexico and you're trying to get something done there, you got to bribe everybody to get anything done. You just might as well face it because that's the way it is. And it was somewhat that way in Iraq. Although with when we were there with the Americans, a lot of that was stopped, but I'm sure it flourished right back up for some reason. But when I was in Myanmar, even though it was a government controlled and everything, uh, to get people to do stuff, I mean, a lot of times they do it for nothing. I mean, they were happy. They were happy to help other people because their culture is one that that I'm not the most important thing in life. We are us,
Yeah, the collective.
the collective us. Uh, I worked there for I guess it was almost a year. We never had anything stolen. We never had anybody not show up for work. They worked in the rain. I mean, they worked under terrible conditions
Yeah.
sometimes. I mean, horrible conditions, you know. Um, and yet, you know, uh, it's when you realize the culture, you've got to kind of sort of fit in. I mean, you can't really say, hey, you got to be like me, you know. And I think that's one of the big mistakes America makes. We go to these countries, like we went to Iraq. We said, well, we're going to help you have democracy and vote. That was a foreign concept to them. I mean, they had always listened to their sheikhs or their religious leaders and done what they were told because they were told who they were going to marry, where they were going to live, what jobs they were going to have. Uh, and I mean, there's some flexibility in there. I'm not saying that it's ironclad, but basically it's a different culture, you know.
Yeah. And logistically, working in Baghdad, what year was it?
I got there in June of 2007, and I was there for 9 months, and then went to Ramadi, uh, which is out towards the Syrian border, and left there in like February, I think it was, of 2009.
How was it flying into Baghdad and going through the airport?
Uh, Very strange. First of all, flying from Amman, we went through Amman and flew into the Baghdad airport. And the first thing you realize is that you're looking and you're flying for, literally hours, and there's nothing green. And then all of a sudden, way off in the distance, it almost looks like a carpet, like a green carpet has been put down. And that's where the two rivers, the Euphrates and the Tigris River, come together. And it's so beautiful. And you fly in. Now, the first thing you realize is I've never been on a commercial airplane where they tilted the airplane almost 90 degrees because they were afraid to get
Yeah.
shot down. And they had these firecracker things, flares and stuff go off. And then they would land. They didn't land near and there's nothing. I mean, there's nothing between the plane and the airport, but they land way out there because they're always afraid that somebody's going to try to rocket them and blow them up. But what was really crazy is when you leave Iraq. First of all, I had to travel from wherever I was to Camp Victory and usually spend the night in Camp Victory. And then early in the morning, they would take me to the airport. I'd get to the airport and they had a little like telephone booth, a little station. You stop there, you show them your ticket and your passport. They move you forward about 20 feet, and there's two guys. And these are two guys that you're not going to mess with. They pat you down, check you. They look at your passport and your ticket. Then they send you further ahead, and they had a line of T-walls. All your luggage is laid out. All the passengers' luggage is laid out, and you go on the other side. Your luggage is then sniffed by the dogs. You go to the other side. You meet a guy. He asks you questions. You show him your passport and your boarding pass. He pats you down, and then you go to the terminal. You're now at the terminal. You put your bag on an x-ray to go into the terminal. Before you go through the door, the guy checks your passport and your uh, boarding pass. You go inside, they pat you down.
Yeah.
Now you're in the terminal, but you're only halfway there. You have to wait until they call your flight. And I have been there in the terminal from 8 o'clock in the morning till 6 o'clock in the evening before I was allowed to go on the other side. And there's nothing. You can't buy a hot dog, a drink.
Yeah.
There, you're lucky there's a toilet. That's not lucky, but anyway, you finally get called. You go through. You run your baggage through the X-rays. You take off your shoes, your belt, everything. They pat you down. You do the same thing, and then you have to pay an exit fee, which really wasn't very expensive. I think it was, but they give you another ticket. Then you go into another room. That room, guess what? Your luggage goes through an X-ray machine. They pat you down, check your things. Now you're at the gates. There's little uh, places where very small, but very where you can buy water and a sandwich, or something to eat. And then when they call your plane, they tell you to go to the gate. Everybody lines up outside the gate. Two guys go down the line checking your passport and your boarding pass. You go into another little room. It has an x-ray machine. Your luggage goes through that x-ray machine. The guy pats you down. Then you go downstairs with your luggage and you get on a tram. The tram takes you way in the hell out. And at times it's 120 degrees out there. It is hotter than hell. But luckily it seems like I always ended up leaving in the evening. Go out there, and then guess what they do? They have you get your bag and then bring it over to where you go onto the plane, and they literally go through your bag. And when I mean literally, like my pill bag, they'd go through all that. What are these? Check the linings and everything, pat you down again, and then you're on the plane.
Wow. So like a five layer security. And you mentioned getting from the airport to the green zone, the military zone. You
Right.
were in a security escort. How did that work?
Uh, Almost all of it was through Aegis, and what they would have is three armored vehicles. We would be in the middle vehicle, and there would be a driver and another guy in there, and then there was a vehicle ahead with a couple guys, and another vehicle in the back. These are SUVs, up armored. I mean, they were, you know, pretty pretty robust vehicles, and not so much when we're going to the airport, but when we did uh, uh, site visits in Ramadi, one guy always had uh, one of these very high-powered automatic weapons. I don't know, for right now, I can't think of the name of it, but I was always glad to see that. But they always every trip, and I mean, I must have taken 100 of these. Every trip before we left, they would go over what you should do if we got stopped, how you would transfer from one vehicle to another vehicle. This phone is for getting to Aegis. This phone is for getting to the U.S. military, and this phone is a sat phone to call.
Yeah.
And they had the numbers on the dash for you. Very methodical and thorough. And almost all these Aegis guys were either Australian or British uh, special forces, and they were phenomenal. Very good. Felt very safe with them. This one guy had to do a little training with him. His name was Chris. I never knew any of the last names. I just knew their first names, and that was kind of on purpose. But Chris was, first of all, he looked like a giant Wookiee. He had a red beard, red hair. I definitely must have been from Scottish origins, although he was Australian. And we had to do this thing where you go down 100 yards and you'd have to carry the person. So he carries me. Most guys, they lifted him up, you know, over their shoulder or whatever. Chris just grabbed me, and I weighed about 190 pounds then. You know, I'm a little heavier now, but he goes running down this field. You know, we get there at the end, and then the guy that was doing the training says, "Okay, now you got to carry your partner back." I look at Chris and I said, "Chris, the only way I could get you back is if you lay on your back and I drag you by your leg." And they said, "No, we're just kidding." Yeah. Um, but the other thing that was memorable about him was he had, you know, uh, his vest, his bulletproof vest on and stuff, but he had pockets in the front, and he had 6 or 7 clips for his weapon. But not only did he have that, but then he had a little bag, gym bag that he carried, and there must have been another 30 clips.
Wow.
And Chris wasn't much for talking. I mean, we never really had a conversation. It was yes, no, you know, you can't go there, you can't do this, you know, that kind of stuff. And I said, "Why do you have so many clips?" "Ran out once." Wasn't going to happen again to him. But I had him and this guy, Steve, and we were on a railroad track. I had to inspect this railroad track to make sure that they had actually, because a lot of stuff, the contractors would say they built, and
Yeah.
they didn't really, or they would do such a terrible job that no train could run on it. But now I'm inspecting this, and I had experience with it because I worked at a power plant where we had we had coal trains coming in all the time. So anyway, it was him and Chris and Steve. And people said, "Weren't you scared?" I mean, because we were right up in the old. I go, "Are you kidding?" I mean, these two guys, you know, I was like a dwarf compared to those guys. So
Did they teach you anything like if you were to get, you know, like in a hostage situation or,
no,
and they didn't say,
no, they did do. They had a medical bag though, and they show you where that's at, and they, you know, the number one thing, compression. It would always. I had some first aid when I was working for Ameren. I never had any first aid over there, but they would always talk about the main thing is, you know, something happens, put compression on it, you know, and here's how you do that. You know, they would show you what you should use in that kit, and it was a nice size. I mean, it had a lot of stuff in it. I mean,
did you guys have any close calls like for, you know, IEDs or anything like that?
well, I had they would routinely mortar the Baghdad area, the green zone, where we were. Uh, but it never really bothered me except for one day, and that was Easter Sunday. And I was getting ready to go. I was getting up. I was going to go to the DFAC and eat, and then go to church. And the church was just right down the street, and it was a Catholic church. You know, they had mass. Um, and it was like 6:30 in the morning, and historically, they never shot martyrs until like 10 o'clock. They slept in, I guess. I never understood that. 10 o'clock and 5 o'clock. 5 o'clock, they did that because they knew people were moving to go get food. But anyway, this was at 6:30, and they started mortaring the compound, and one hit at the end of the place where we were staying at the rooms at the dorm like, and I turned around, and I could feel the concussion of uh, that mortar. I run back and got in my room, put on my Kevlar, my hat, my helmet, and went in the bathroom and shut the door and sat on the toilet, uh, and sat there for quite a while. And then that's also, I had learned that to have some food in your room because you might be stuck in there. So I had some sardines and yogurt. They always had yogurt at the DFAC, yogurt and soda and stuff like that. So, and some fruit. So, but that was probably the only real close call. We had a couple times where we were driving down the highway the wrong way.
So they would switch lanes because
They saw something up ahead, and to avoid that, they would go in the oncoming traffic and drive, you know, not slow, 50, 60 miles an hour.
much harder to hit if you're driving.
That's right. That's exactly there. And then we were at a roundabout, and there was some idiot had gotten this roundabout, and all it takes is really, I think, one idiot, all clogged up. and there was a policeman there trying to uh, to get it undone, and our guys were under the orders never stop, because once you stop, you're a target. They drove up onto the sidewalk and across this stuff, and uh, the cop tried to stop them. No chance, you know.
Okay. So, yeah, kind of shifting gears, like what are some of the things, now we've kind of talked about your past. What about your present? What makes you happy now? And how's that changed over time?
Hmm. Well, I mean, basically taking care of Chester and Mary and her two daughters, Krista and Brittany. I really like her daughters. They're very sweet. And I guess because I never had a daughter, or a sister, uh, they I've become very close to them. Um, but just trying to do things around the house, keep things up, planning trips to see my son. That's one of the biggies. Planning trips for Mary to go golfing. And we have a good time. We go to Phoenix. We've been going to Phoenix every year now, and then to Myrtle Beach. Phoenix in February, and Myrtle Beach in May.
What were some of your highlights from this trip to Croatia and Athens and Georgia?
Oh, seeing you and Hectorina. I mean, it's so wonderful. She's so sweet. I think you're very lucky. I mean, you couldn't have found a better person, I don't think. Um, but Athens, the meal was fantastic. Split, seeing your friend Chad and his wife and his two daughters, who are just adorable. I mean, those two little girls. If I was a dad and I had two daughters like that, they would get anything they wanted. They could, Daddy, please, it's, sure, here, go, you know. I mean, how could you say no to them? I mean, really. And they're not, they're not pushy about it. They're very sweet about it,
Yeah.
If they were, Daddy, I have to have that. I said, no, you're not going to get it. That's it. But, oh, Daddy, what about this? What about that? And their dog, what was his dog name? Not Puko, Paco.
Yeah.
Paco. Yeah, Paco, his dog was brown Labrador. He was sweet. Um, I thought, and we had a beautiful place that we stayed at. My gosh, and had some good meals there too. Uh, Ekaterina fixed breakfast every morning. Um, I hadn't had those sausages, those white sausages. Man, I haven't had those in ages. My grandmother used to get those and loved those.
What'd you think about the boat dad?
Oh, that was awesome. And that guy was such a character too. Tom,
Tom.
Tom,
Tom and Tom.
Tom and Tom. He was he, he was not bashful, let me tell you. Tom was something else. Of course, I guess he'd been doing that for so many years.
Yeah.
But it was so beautiful there. The water is just
Unbelievable.
it's like how can you see 30 feet deep? Yeah. No, it's not very deep here. It's only 14 meters. Oh, shit. It's, I, I don't know what the hell deep is for him, but,
And that restaurant by the wall
oh,
very cool.
The ambiance was really nice. The food was real good.
Yeah.
But I have to say, the best meal that I've had was that
In Athens.
in Athens.
Yeah.
That I mean,
Unbelievable.
but Chad's Mexican food was awesome too. That was very good.
We definitely had some good food.
Yeah. As you can see,
And a good borscht last night.
good borscht last night.
Yeah.
So,
Awesome, Dad. Well, that's it. Thanks for everything.
oh, thank you.
Love you.
Love you too, Mike. And thanks for everything that you've been doing. It's been a great visit.